This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Americans have long had an obsession with wealth. But despite our love of wealth, there have been attempts in the past to separate money from politics. That's for good reason. The moneyed don't share similar experiences or interests as those with less money, which happens to be most of us. But now, money seems like it's much more firmly, or at least openly, influencing our politics as high-level business operatives are getting really cozy with the Trump administration. To be sure, American politics has long had too many lobbyists and too much money fueling campaigns. But Donald Trump's administration breaks records. The total net worth of billionaires involved with it amounts to more than $300 billion, which is more money than what's amassed in 172 countries. One tech figure in particular has been making a lot of headlines. Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, has become central in President Donald Trump's orbit. And his tactics in business at SpaceX and Tesla and X are now meant to help shape government practices.
Robin, the proof is in his preparations to launch DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, where he hopes to modernize federal technology and make cuts, a lot of them. Musk wants to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. He also wants to make things run faster and smoother, which is a legitimate problem government agencies have had for a long time. So, these changes of running the government like a company has left us with a question we want to ask you. Should the government be run like a business? Give us a call and let us know your thoughts at 313-577-1019. And we're taking your calls. We want to know how much rich people are influencing our politics and how much of a change that is from our past administrations. To discuss this now, we have Graham Robertson with us. He is a professor of political science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's someone who studies authoritarian politics. Professor Robertson, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Of course, Professor Robertson, getting into things. Very, very rich people are now in spaces where they have the direct ear of the president or are running government departments. And as a result, several scholars and journalists are claiming that we are now living in an oligarchy. I want to dig into that term a little bit. What is an oligarchy?
Right. So this is an old term, actually. It goes all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle thought of government as being of two kinds, essentially governments that were in the interests of the citizens and governments that were in the interests of the rulers. And for Aristotle, oligarchy was a government in which a small number of people controlled the state for their own purposes. He wasn't so bothered about the small numbers. He also thought of what he called aristocracy, when a small number of people controlled the state in the interests of the state. But for him, really, it's about small numbers and self-interest.
Small numbers and self-interest, which is something that we were debating here, actually.
Sound familiar?
Yes, we were definitely debating that. So what are the signs to tell that a country is run by a system of oligarchy, where the power is in the hands of just a few wealthy people?
Well, it's the ability to transform wealth into public policy, into rules, into regulations that allow people to enhance that wealth even further. And so if you think about the way campaign finance, for example, is organized in the United States, money has always been important. And you mentioned that in the run up to the segment. People have been worried about this for a long, long time. But it just seems to have gotten a lot worse in recent years. So in 1990, it cost about $4 million to run for the Senate. That's in today's dollars. By 2023, that was up to $27 million. And you just see that the great difference that makes in the reliance of politicians on private donors. You think about Elon Musk's $250 million donation to President Trump's campaign. That's going to turn itself into hundreds of billions of dollars that he's going to make on this supposed effort to fly to Mars. And so when you really get to a point where where investments in politics have such an obvious financial payback for those making the investments, that's when things are really out of control.
Seems familiar. As you just mentioned, money has always been a part of politics, and in recent decades, it's gotten a lot worse. Dollars lobbying the federal government topped $2 billion in 2024, a record. Billions are spent on federal campaigns, often breaking records. So, congressional races now amount to millions of dollars. Is there any notable difference about what we're seeing in the Trump administration?
So I think there are some differences. So just thinking about the appointments, for example, of people who are actually in the administration. Now, there was always key jobs that were controlled by American capital. So if you think about President Bush having Treasury secretaries from Goldman Sachs, that was also true for Trump's first administration when Steve Mnuchin was Treasury Secretary. And then, of course, we have this billionaire today appointed. It was also true under Clinton and under Johnson that Goldman Sachs provided the Treasury Secretary. But so it's always been this pattern of appointing hyper-rich individuals to some of these key positions. But what we see now is the spread of that all across the government into things like the Department of Education, into this Department of Government Efficiency, and really a switch from it's really more than just one of size, but one of a kind. So when you mentioned Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, and he has $400 billion or something, I think was the figure you said, that just is so much larger than anything we saw even in the Trump administration the first time around. So I think, what these tendencies that have been clear in American politics for the last 30 years have really been hyped up and much more under Trump than ever before.
So is it safe to ask, is all this money influencing politics? It's a logical conclusion from where we've been, as corporations can spend as much as they want, as money is speech. Is what we're seeing with tech moguls influencing Trump in exchange for singing his praises, a natural place of where we've been going for a long time? Is this a natural progression of American politics?
So I think it's definitely the continuation of a trend. Now, the question is, I think, have we now reached a crisis point where the situation that's been getting worse and worse for a long time has now just moved to another level with a president who doesn't care about the perceptions, who doesn't care to do things behind closed doors, and it's now all much more out in the open and on a much, much vaster scale. And I think that change in scale does matter. I think it is reaching a crisis point. People like Bernie Sanders and others have been talking for decades about the need for public financing for campaigns, for the need to get money out of politics. But it seems such small potatoes now, what happened 10 years ago relative to what's happening now.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Graham Robertson. He's a professor of political science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We're discussing the amount of money and rich business owners that now influence our politics. And we want to hear from you. We're wondering what you think about the government being run like a business. Should it be? Call in at 313-577-1019 and let us know. Professor Robertson, what are the ways in which oligarchy distorts politics? I'm wondering what kinds of changes you see in democracies in particular when an oligarchy takes hold. And again, we'll remind folks that is when the government is run by a few powerful people who have specific self-interests. Thank you, Aristotle.
So my career has mostly been spent studying Russia and Ukraine. And Russia actually provides a really good example of what can happen when an oligarchy takes control. In the mid-1990s, Russia was a kind of a rough and tumble democracy but it certainly had elections that mattered and it had a free press. What happened in Russia was that a small group of 7 bankers made a deal with the president that they would essentially fund his campaign, help him win the election, and then they would get the spoils of that victory. And the spoils of that victory was the privatization of Russia's vast mineral resources, oil and gas and gold and other resources, for a pittance. And what that meant for Russia as a country, you had essentially the privatization of enormous wealth that should have been used to build schools, that should have been used to build hospitals, roads, and invest in a broader industrial base for the country. And so you got stagnation and poverty rising directly out of this privatization of state power. The classic definition of an oligarchy. What we risk doing is going down a similar road where we cut budgets for schools, we cut budgets for refugee resettlement, we cut budgets for Medicaid, we cut budgets for all sorts of important things that everyday Americans depend upon, and instead invest it on boondoggles like trips to Mars, right? Because that's what directly is going to benefit people like Elon Musk, whether we go to Mars or not. The process of shifting the focus of the U.S. government over to these kinds of projects, I think that's incredibly dangerous, and it's really going to hurt ordinary Americans in the long run.
So we're talking about, at its core, the risk of dramatically deepening economic inequality.
That's right. I mean, when you have a government that's based on a system in which you can translate money pretty much directly into power, then there's what economists call increasing returns to that. In other words, the situation gets worse and worse, and it gets worse fast. And there's sort of perhaps there's a tipping point phenomenon that we get to that maybe we've already gotten to, in which money is so important in politics and translates so easily into policies that help individual rich people and not society as a whole. And then
Professor Robertson, are you there?
I'm here. Yeah. Did I get cut off?
You did for a moment. I want to stay on the notion of the societal impacts, because I'm thinking about Russia, which you have used as an example here. And we were discussing deepening economic inequality as a result of oligarchy. It also has me thinking about human rights violations running rampant, and how we know that is happening in Russia. And it also makes me think about the lack of a free press that's there. And I wonder if you could talk about those two concerns.
Yeah, well, so what happened in Russia, and this I think is a cautionary tale, is that the accommodation of the oligarchs to the state when Putin came into power. He basically made them a deal. He said, "Okay, guys, you can keep all your wealth, but you stay out of politics. Politics is my domain." In other words, you have a situation in which the oligarchs become required to support the government. They become required to pay homage to the government, to sing the government's praises, to talk about Putin as though he's a world historic figure who's essential to the political system. All of which is increasingly familiar. And so when you have extremely wealthy business people like Musk turning around to essentially becoming subservient to the president, and it's far from only Musk as a whole, tech bros that we saw at the inauguration, the coincidence of those interests is really damaging for democracy. It's damaging for freedom of the press, and it's damaging specifically for human rights.
What does an appropriate relationship then between business and government look like?
So this, I think, gets to your broader question for the audience about should government be run like a business? Now, the job of the government is to make investments in the country to support the well-being and growth and development of the citizens of that country, right? And that's a very different operation from making profits. Profit maximization. It's a very different business from supporting the private interests of oligarchs. And so in order to make that happen, we have to start taking money out of politics. And of course, as we mentioned at the top of the segment, that's really hard, and money's always really, really been important. But it's a matter of degree. There's legislation. So once once Citizens United gets passed, and we have this proliferation of different vehicles that allow very non-transparent use of money in campaigns, this is obviously going to make life much, much more challenging. And so I think starting to think about different ways, and there's lots of people who've done good research on this, thinking about different ways in which we can at least make money in politics more transparent to begin with. And then hopefully, as people become more aware of what's going on, pressure will grow to clean the system up.
We mentioned Elon Musk in our intro. He's someone who has millions of dollars in federal contracts, and he's now making key government decisions about efficiency. So you've talked about this a little bit, this being an example. Is it an example of oligarchy when we think of, a few rich people running the government in their self-interest, where they are only or mostly looking out for those interests and not the interests of the general public?
Oh, I think it clearly is. I mean, the question is, to what extent is Musk likely to be constrained in the kinds of recommendations, the kinds of policy ideas that he can generate? Where is the pressure in that appointment to make decisions that support the broader interests of the American public rather than his own private interests? And the answer is there aren't any. So I think this is one of the most clear-cut examples. Now, fortunately, at least it looks for now that DOGE will not be a department, that its role will be purely advisory. But we'll see how that evolves over time, and to the extent to which the suggestions that DOGE comes up with are adopted by the Congress. That'll be where we'll really tell the extent to which oligarchization has really taken hold.
So what I'm gathering from you, Professor Robertson, is that there really is no world in which oligarchy and democracy can coexist peacefully side by side. Is it possible to have both? Are there any examples of that in the world?
So you can have oligarchy and you can have free and fair elections, right? Which is what we have, and what Russia had in the 90s, more or less. It's what Ukraine had for a really long time before the Russian invasion. And that's a case in which you have elections and they're free and fair, but they're so biased by money that the outcomes are highly predictable. So you could have elections that look, if you don't look too closely, okay, but to have real substantive democracy in which the voice of the people is actually heard, where policies are implemented that enhance people's life outcomes, that make it the pursuit of happiness easier and more successful for them. That's completely, I think, diametrically opposed to oligarchy. So you can have an oligarchy with the trappings of democracy, but a democracy that actually substantively delivers for people is totally incompatible with oligarchy, and you just don't see it anywhere.
Graham Robertson is a professor of political science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He studies authoritarian politics. Professor Robertson, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Coming up, we'll continue discussing money in our politics and focus on Elon Musk, who wants to run the government more like a business. And we want to ask you this question: do you think we should run the government like a business? Give us a call. Let us know. The number is 313-577-1019.
It's the Metro on WDET. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We've been talking about how much money has been getting into our politics. And now we want to talk about someone who both has a lot of money and who has inserted himself in our politics. That's Elon Musk. Musk is arguably the richest person in the world. The South African native co-founded Tesla, SpaceX, and an artificial intelligence company, and he runs X, formerly known as Twitter. Musk has also come into federal politics with a big rightward turn. He's made bigoted statements about black people. He supported far right-wing parties around the world. And he made the gesture of a Nazi salute at a speech he gave last week.
That's a lot of stuff, Tia. Now Musk is set to run a new government department known as DOGE. The Department of Government Efficiency is what that stands for. In this space, he hopes to modernize federal technology and make cuts. Lots of cuts. Musk wants to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. For the rest of the hour, we want to understand what exactly Elon Musk wants to do and how he wants to turn the government into a business, and the very real improvements that need to be made in government. To discuss that now, we have Bilal Beydoun here. He's the director of Democratic Institutions at Roosevelt Forward. That's an advocacy affiliate of the Roosevelt Institute, a progressive think tank. Bilal, welcome to the Metro.
Such a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
So you just published a blog post about the differences between government and business titled "Democracy is Not a Rocket Ship." Lay it out here for us. What are the differences between government and business?
Well, in private business, you might be able to make some cuts or improve some technology if you're only producing, say, an iPhone or an electric car. And those decisions would be really beneficial to the business. The government has a far more vast mandate and has so many other competing priorities beyond simply efficiency. In fact, efficiency as an ultimate end doesn't really make sense in government. The government's ultimate priority is to do things like protect public health, public safety, make sure people have economic security, make sure our environment, our air and water are not poisoning us. So all of these are huge societal goals that the government is tasked with ensuring and carrying out. And so, these functions run the gamut from things like air traffic control to providing veterans health care to conducting cancer research. I mean, it is just vast. And whereas I think, some private sector executives who only produce one or two things can be under the illusion that government is similar, and it's simply not.
I mean, you will hear people say that the government is like a business, or it should be handled like someone's own personal finances. You got to manage government budgets like you manage your own household budget. So why is that wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, I recall people saying that, over a decade ago in Flint, Michigan, actually. And, it was much cheaper to switch the municipal water source to the Flint River. Through a purely efficiency lens, that's the move that made sense. And that resulted in the poisoning of an entire city and the largest man-made environmental catastrophe in American history. So, efficiency and cutting costs, it's not the only thing that matters. There are also so many other things. My colleague at the Roosevelt Institute, Sabil Rahman, he likes to bring up the example of in the 1930s, women were going blind from mascara because there was no regulation of cosmetics. We don't have to worry about that today. If you go to Sephora or you go to Ulta, it's not a life or death trip because we have a government that inspects cosmetics, and the FDA.
Way to speak to the room here, Bilal.
I was about to say, Bilal, come through.
Yeah, I got you. I will next time in studio.
Sorry, please go on. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and so the reality is, even from a cost-cutting perspective, right? If you just track the timeline of Elon Musk and this Department of Government Efficiency, you will see wild swings in what their goals were. When he started out, he said he wanted to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. So just to give folks a sense of how big that number is, if you cut out defense spending, and you cut out Medicare and Social Security, which are mandatory spending. These are kind of on autopilot. You're talking about every other thing that the government does. I mean, this is about 30% of government spending. The DOGE folks have since narrowed that down to $1 trillion. And then they narrowed it down again and said, well, we're actually just going to do IT upgrades. And so, look, I mean, just judging based on the last month or so, the most efficient thing that DOGE did was reducing its leadership from 3 billionaires to just one.
Okay, is it even possible what Elon Musk wants to do, that he can make $2 trillion cuts from the federal budget?
No, and in fact, people on all sides of the political spectrum, the most libertarian conservatives, the most progressive liberals, have all warned Musk and DOGE that cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget is not realistic. It's not possible. Certainly not possible without a bunch of people dying, without, the federal government effectively collapsing. I think Musk believes that himself at this point. That's why when President Trump signed the executive order recently establishing the Department of Government Efficiency, which, by the way, is not a government department, it basically is going to replace an existing White House office called the U.S. Digital Service. So how did we go from cutting 30% of the entire federal budget to basically replacing the U.S. Digital Service, which is like an office launched in 2014 to fix computer systems? This was back when Obama's healthcare reform was being rolled out, and they wanted the computer systems to really be able to handle the magnitude of that reform. And so we're back where we started. I should also mention, just historically speaking, that this isn't new. In the last time that President Trump became president, he appointed his son-in-law to lead a similar effort. I think back then it was called a SWAT team or something similar. And the goal then was to achieve efficiencies for our customers, who are the citizens. That's what Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, was saying at the time. Well, that team eventually morphed into just another run-of-the-mill government office. It was the White House Office of American Innovation. And so the last swing at government efficiency by the Trump administration actually resulted in the creation of a new government program, which is ironic.
What can Musk, would you say, realistically accomplish with DOGE? What are the things that you think about? What could he practically do when we're talking about making cuts to the government, which is central to that mission?
Sure. So I think in order to answer that question, we have to take stock of the type of efficiency work that Musk has done in his career. So he's led some successful companies. There are a lot of successful business people in the United States. So why is it Elon Musk in particular who's been chosen to solve the problem of government inefficiency, which, let's be honest, of course is government inefficiency. When you have a $6 trillion plus budget, there's going to be inefficiencies. I would never doubt that. Musk has this mantra that is mentioned in one of his recent biographies, and his mantra is delete, 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 which is kind of a mantra that he brings into his companies. So, for example, when he took over Twitter, one of the first actions he did was to cut 80% of jobs in Twitter. In his other company, SpaceX, he has sort of bragged about, making rocket ships more efficient by replacing some of the really expensive latches that go inside of a rocket ship. I think they're about $1,500 a piece, with repurposed bathroom locks. So this was like a major,
we're going to Mars
win for.
That's a little concerning.
Well, there you go. And you could only start to imagine what the bathroom locks version of our government is. So, I mean, what can Elon, and then the other thing to consider is why Elon Musk? Again, look, President Biden relied on business executives, consulted them, and convened executives at various points. It's not uncommon for a president to consult leaders in the private sector. But Elon Musk is going to have an office, reportedly, in the West Wing of the White House. The richest man on earth having an office in the West Wing. For those for people who've worked in the White House and been around the federal government, they know there are not a lot of offices in the West Wing of the White House. So this is just unprecedented access based on the fact that Elon Musk pumped $250 million into pro-Trump campaign groups. And this level of access is his reward for the successful outcome.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Bilal Baidoun, the director of Democratic Institutions at Roosevelt Forward. We're discussing Elon Musk's new post in the Trump administration, running the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. And we want to hear from you. Should we run the government more like a business? 313-577-1019. We're headed to the phone lines. Christian in Grosse Pointe Park, thanks for calling the Metro. What do you think, Christian? Should the U.S. government be run like a business?
Thank you. Well, I don't think the answer to that question is black and white. So, for example, my wife just got notified last night that the green card renewal, the green card was just produced. We don't know when we'll receive it, but at least it's been produced. She submitted the application in March of 2021, so we're closing in on 2 years. So that's just an example of where I think if someone comes in from a private company sort of mindset, we will be able to find efficiencies. And that's, I think, very needed. On the other hand, I think, for example, the Department of Education should be pumped full of resources and very robust. So I don't think it's black and white. I think we need to look at each individual situation and realize if we make it binary like that, we're going to be opposing each other as opposed to working together, find, tenable solutions to these issues.
Christian, thank you so much for calling the Metro. Let's stay to the phones. Let's stay on the phones. We have Anka in Royal Oak. Anka, hello. Welcome to the Metro, of course. Should the government be run like a business, Anka?
I'd like to ask a question back to you rather than answer that. I think you know my answer. I want to know which government in history has been successfully run like a business. Google it. There is no answer. It doesn't happen. There's no answer, all right? But you have two different things, okay? So are beans and tomatoes, are they fruits or vegetables? And do we treat them the same? What I want to know is how do we get rid of the oligarchy besides, getting rid of Citizens United, and why we would turn to a failed businessman like Trump. And, Musk is a distraction, but he still needs workers. And why are these males worshiping Elon Musk? The real threat is Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, Vought.
Anka, Anka, thank you so much, as always, for calling into the Metro, letting us know your thoughts. You're a no on should the government be run like a business. So, Bilal, how can we minimize money in politics? Is this an international movement we're seeing, or what can we do?
Yeah, well, somebody mentioned Citizens United earlier. That was the disastrous Supreme Court case that basically posited that, corporations pumping unlimited money into our political process is a form of speech. And so, that there needs to be a constitutional amendment to basically change that. But I think that there's more to it. I think in terms of Elon Musk, part of the problem is American culture. I think we have a cultural belief that very wealthy people have the answers to everything. That if you are a wealthy person, if you are a billionaire, and you were successful in building a specific type of company, then you should be able to fix public education. You should be able to fix public health. You should be able to fix government efficiency. And I think that cultural belief is something that needs to change through narrative work and generally through people just taking stock, as the last caller said, of all the failures whenever government has been run like a business.
And Bilal, I hear that and I think to myself, try to counter that. But I think to myself, well, we always say money can't buy happiness, which we know that's not the truth. So I'm thinking about just seeing these successful folks, seeing them rise to a certain level of what we as Americans in this culture and this society think is a success. And we see, well, if they're successful, we should follow suit. Why do we have this belief? Why do we idolize the ultra wealthy?
Yeah, this is I think this is in part a function of a 4 or 5 decades in the making attack on government, which is the only thing. Let's be clear: the government is the only thing that we collectively own in this society. Like this is the only organization we all belong to. And we belong, and I think the people who believe that private interests, that the wealthy, that large corporations know better than we do, because we profess our voice through the political process. Those people have a vested interest in making sure that the government is viewed as this inefficient dinosaur. And by the way, you mentioned money doesn't buy happiness. Ironically, money can buy efficiency in some cases. By the way, the case in point here is the IRS. The IRS got an influx of funding under the Biden administration, and as soon as they got the additional funding, they recovered $1 billion from wealthy people who were evading taxes within months. And so, if you want to talk about arguably the most efficient agency in our government, it is the IRS. And by the way, the Doge folks and Musk in particular have already said that the first agency that they are going to focus on is not the Pentagon, which can't pass an audit, by the way. The Pentagon hasn't, is not able to literally pass an audit, but the IRS. He said he wants to automate IRS enforcement, and there's a reason for that. It's because, and reduce its workforce. And it's because auditing the ultra wealthy is very resource intensive, but it's incredibly efficient. In fact, when the IRS audits the wealthy, it can get as high as a 12-to-1 return on investment. So if you want to be efficient, collect unpaid taxes from the wealthy. That's probably the most efficient thing that the government can do.
And, just staying on topic, are there examples in other countries where we've seen a government as business approach go wrong? What does that look like?
I mean, I think we've seen it go wrong in this country. I think, ever since Ronald Reagan said those infamous words of, the most dangerous 9 words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. What we've seen is financial crises. We've seen deregulation. We've seen environmental degradation. We've seen stagnating wages in this country for decades. And a big part of that is because government has taken a backseat to private markets. People who believe that the solution to everything lies in the market. The market knows best. The market knows best what kind of education your child needs, what kind of health care you need, what kind of economy we should have and how we should manage it. But that's failed. That's failed. And that, in my business, is what we would call neoliberalism. That's the name for that ideology that says government has no role or very little role to play in the kind of society that we shape.
And Bilal, just speaking about the culture and talking about just the way that we move around money and those the uber rich in this country, how do we change this conversation? How do we change the culture? Ask a teenager what they want when they grow up, and they probably aren't saying president. They're probably not saying they want to be in the government or be the president or be a mayor or something like that. So how do we get young people involved in politics, and how do we just get people who aren't involved in politics more interested?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the big question. I think that most people, like you said, don't follow political news for a living. They're mostly concerned about their own lives, their own prosperity, their own economic lives. And, I think people who want to draw more young people and other people into the political process have to give them an incentive to do so. And I think part of that is actually selling the victories of government. Government is often kind of a victim of its own success. And so if you don't drink poisonous water, you don't think, wow, the government cleaned up my water. But that's often what's happening. When your airplane lands safely, you don't kind of instinctively think air traffic control, but the FAA played a role in you landing safely. There are, and of course, there are many things that just last year the government was doing to protect consumers. I mean, I know a lot of young people are, have to rely on credit cards just to get through college and just to make ends meet. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a government agency, actually capped late fees on payments at $8. These credit card companies were charging people $40 for a late payment. This is the kind of casual sort of exploitation that's just rife within our economy. There's scams everywhere. There's fraud everywhere. There's exploitation. I think in 2023, Wendy's, announced that they would be moving to this, algorithmic pricing sort of approach where, if you're in a drive-thru and it's snowing outside, they could charge you more. I mean, these kinds of things just are like 1,000 little cuts, and they make people really frustrated. And it's the government's responsibility to make sure those things don't happen. And when the government does good things, we have to tell a good story about that success.
You're listening to The Metro. We'll continue our conversation with Bilal Beydoun about Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Should we run government more like a business? The phone lines are open. The number is 313-577-1019. Let us know.
It's The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. We'll be right back.
It's The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We've been discussing the enormous amount of money in our politics and the big influence that tech moguls like Elon Musk have on our politics. A lot of these business executives want to run the government more like a business. And now some of them are getting the opportunity to do just that. On this show, we're trying to understand the consequences of that decision.
And that's right, Robin. We want to hear from you. The phone lines are open. Should we run government more like a business? It's 313-577-1019. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll take your calls once again and dive deeper into government efficiency, which we're about to do right now with Bilal Beydoun. He is the director of Democratic Institutions at Roosevelt Forward, an advocacy affiliate of the Roosevelt Institute, a progressive think tank. Bringing you back into the conversation, Bilal. Mm-hmm. There are serious problems that our government does face, spaces where government inefficiency is really difficult to overcome. You ended the last conversation talking a little bit about the IRS, and they always collect their money, and they're very efficient. So it's difficult for a lot of people to either drop out of the government or work. So I'm just thinking about, why do you think we have this problem with government inefficiency in the first place?
Well, I don't know that government efficiency is the main problem with government. Government has, as I mentioned earlier, has far more important priorities than efficiency. In part because a private sector organization, what matters most there is profit, and so you have a single goal, which is, let's become more efficient, let's cut costs, let's get better technology to increase profit. I mean, it's a fairly simple mission. And government simply doesn't have that kind of mission. The federal government is looking at 330 million people in a country as wide as a continent, with all sorts of challenges, from natural disasters to non-communicable diseases to as I mentioned, air traffic control, providing funding for students with disabilities. I mean, there are so many things that the government does that require expertise, that require all sorts of complicated legal and regulatory mechanisms to protect people from threats. They could be health threats, they could be safety threats. The government has to inspect our food. It has to regulate the disposal of hazardous materials. I mean, I can go on. It's just, it has such a sweeping mandate. And so for somebody to come in and say, well, the government isn't as efficient as my company that produces widgets, that's not serious. And we should never want our government to function in such a way similar to a company that just produces widgets. Mm.
Bilal, it may not be the main problem, but actually delivering services can be a problem. For example, sure. Even after Biden got the Inflation Reduction Act passed, much of that money hasn't been implemented in states and cities. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, implementation takes time, and that's kind of our system of federalism is the federal government allocates money, and then states, are often responsible for planning how to spend it, and then localities also have their own plans for how to spend money. So, we have a federalist system, and implementation takes time. I will say that, like, going back to Musk and Doge, and as it relates to the Inflation Reduction Act, as you just mentioned, it's interesting that Elon Musk in June railed against the Biden administration because, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the administration had a $42 billion investment in rural broadband, basically bringing internet to places that don't have broadband. Pretty laudable thing. And Elon Musk at the time had said that this is an outrageous waste of taxpayer money. And so on the surface, you might say, okay, maybe there are implementation problems with that. Maybe it's going too slowly. Maybe it's not targeted to the right places. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you find out that the agency responsible for administering that new program had denied Elon Musk a $900 million grant to one of his companies. And so I think the problem we're dealing with here is you have the richest man in the world, as I said, who is now positioned to categorize any government program that he doesn't like or does not serve his companies as inefficient, that he has the biggest platform in government because of the name of this organization, the Department of Government Efficiency, to simply declare that something is inefficient. And people may not know why. They may not know these backstories. They may not know the sort of backroom dealings. And if you look at how the Department of Government Efficiency is going to work from a transparency and ethics perspective, you will find that it's going to operate by very different rules. Their meetings are not going to be public. It's going to be shielded from, certain public disclosures. And so, we're not working with the same definitions of efficiency often. I think that's a huge part of the problem. I think for a lot of, billionaires.
Bilal, just really quickly, because we want to get to the phone lines again and hear from some of our listeners.
Sure thing.
But I do want to say that you are listening to the Metro. And if you are just joining us, I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Bilal Baydoun. He's the director of Democratic Institutions at Roosevelt Forward. That's an advocacy affiliate of the Roosevelt Institute think tank. And we're discussing how to improve government services. And we want to hear from you. Should we run the government more like a business? The number is 313-577-1019. Philip in Detroit, thank you for calling the Metro. What do you think? Should the government be run more like a business?
Well, I want to take us back on memory lane for a minute here. I'm in Detroit, which is in Michigan, and I can't even remember the governor's name, but he campaigned successfully as a Republican governor on the idea of using business acumen to make Michigan's government more efficient. That led to, at one point, an appointee of his attempting to save about $50,000 by changing the water system in the city of Flint. It turned into one of the biggest penny-wise, pound-foolish fiascos in the history of Michigan because it destroyed the water system. It put thousands of lives in danger, maybe even killed some people.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much for calling the Metro. I believe that you are referring to Governor Rick Snyder. And Bilal, you mentioned Flint, actually, as an example of what goes wrong when governments are not implementing the proper oversight. Is that right? Go ahead.
Absolutely. Look, I think every Michigander has an advantage here in understanding what's happening with Doge because the Flint water crisis is seared into our memories. And to say nothing, of course, of the people of Flint themselves who were sold efficiency and ended up with poisoned water. Now, that's not always a guaranteed outcome. Again, I'm happy to talk about, less sort of dire forms of reforms that will lead to efficiency beyond switching an entire city's water source. But yeah, for me personally, as I am a Michigander, when I hear private business people talking about government efficiency, people who have no experience with government, people who have never had to earn a vote in their lives, have never had to withstand Senate confirmation in their lives, when I hear them talking about running the government like a business, the Flint water crisis is exactly what I think about.
Bilal Baydoun is the director of Democratic Institutions at Roosevelt Forward, an advocacy affiliate of the Roosevelt Institute think tank. Bilal, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Metro.
My pleasure.
And that is the Metro for Tuesday, January 28th. This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.